So now we're going to turn it over to our program speaker, Mr. Glenn White, and he also has April Chatham Carpenter. I hope I said that right, April. And they are going to be speaking to us about Better Angels organization. I am not going to go into detail because I know their time is limited, but they can share more and their energy. Anne has heard them speak and knows Glenn through her Rotary recently. So, Mr. Glenn, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to let April go next. Let's see, let me make sure I've got this right. Okay. I'm doing the sharing screen. And by the way, you may want to consider pinning this screen if you want to see the slides. Otherwise, you can watch April. So, and by the way, we're going to have point out that name change. We're actually Braver Angels now instead of Better Angels. But can everybody see this slide okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay, April,
Yes,
go ahead
sir.
and take it away.
Great. We're very excited to be here, and I thought I would introduce myself. I am Dr. April Chatham Carpenter. I'm a professor in the Department of Applied Communication at University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I've been here since 2015, but I grew up in Arkansas, and so it was great to be able to come back home after many years of being a professor in another state. Glenn is, we're glad to have us working together on this. He's been a practicing psychologist in Central Arkansas for quite a while. Has been involved actually longer with this organization than I have. And the organization changed its name recently. It was Better Angels up until April, and then they had some copyright issues with that name with another group, and so they have actually changed their name to Braver Angels, which is what you see on the screen now. We think we're going to have a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So, but if you would hold your questions or type them into the chat box, which you can access from the bottom of your screen, then we would be able to answer those questions, we think, at the end. And if you could stay muted during the session until we ask for questions at the end of the session, that would also help with sound quality. So Braver Angels is a bipartisan movement that was started by a group of Democrats and Republicans after the 2016 presidential election in Ohio, actually, and it is now grown to over 10,000 members in all 50 states. We have about 90 folks that have been involved, started to get involved in the organization here in the state. And in a little bit, when Glenn starts speaking, I'm going to actually put a link in so that if you want to follow up or with us about more information, then you can go to that link and fill out a brief survey about that. Our goals really are to try to increase dialogue that is civil across our political differences. And we know that that's has been really exacerbated recently in the last few years in terms of what our differences are. And so we're really trying to build structures in which, and the whole organization is trying to build structures in which we can really talk across the political divide and to bring us back into conversation and relationship so that we can be able to see that, we really do have some shared values, perhaps some common ground, but even if we don't agree, we can live respectfully. And so much of the opposite of things that we see in social media now, where people are just baiting each other and trying to, show where they are on the opposite sides. So we're trying to, as an organization, change political behavior via this kind of grassroots influence. So we thought that we would, today, Glenn would take a few minutes to talk about the problem of polarization. And so while he's presenting, I'm going to keep track of any questions that you all might have in the chat box so that we have some time for questions at the end. I'm also going to put the link if you would like more information about Braver Angels. So I'm turning this over to Glenn.
All right, thank you. So as April was talking about, polarization is what we're trying to target, and it's a really serious problem. I doubt anybody would object to that characterization. but I thought it'd be helpful to show some specific details, some data here. If you look here, this is this whole thing is from the Pew Research Center, and they have been tracking how different members of the two parties feel toward the other party for over 2 decades, going back to 1994, and these graphs reflect movement from then until 2016. So here we've got Republicans, and what this is measuring is agreement by Republicans of this statement. Democrats are very unfavorable. They view them very unfavorably. Same thing over here, Democrats and how they view Republicans. And notice the growth from 94 all the way up here 2016. And what do you want to bet that since 2016, here in the 3 to 4 years, it's gotten worse, and there's not much room to get worse. So clearly there's a real problem here. There are a lot of bad things that happen from polarization. This is not a comprehensive list, but we all know we've had these same experiences where some of our family members or friends, those relationships suffer because we have different viewpoints, and we get into an antagonistic, conflictual kind of relationship, and sometimes it even causes the end of relationships. That's what happens when things get extreme with polarization. Another thing that happens when people grow increasingly polarized, they tend to get more extreme in their views, and the research is pretty clear that when people are extreme in their beliefs, they're more prone to be susceptible to misinformation and fake news and propaganda and things like that. So they wind up having more beliefs that are in touch with reality. So that's a problem. And then we all know that this has resulted in more conflict throughout our society, sometimes even reaching the point of violence. Another really serious consideration is its impact on government. The way this happens, it's not only the citizens, it's the parties, it's the Congress, it's the government officials and politicians that grow more polarized as well. And what happens then, and we've seen this in recent years, there's a refusal to compromise on almost everything. And so what happens is things become paralyzed and we don't get our problems addressed. That gridlock on the legislative end then means that the other two branches of government, the executive and judicial, can go in and fill in that power gap. And of course, that goes precisely against the checks and balances that our founders developed when they wrote the Constitution. So it's really impairing governmental functioning. And then political scientists looking and doing research in this area now are understanding more and more it's even more serious than that. It has been shown in other governments around the world that where there are democratic kinds of government systems in place, when you have extreme polarization, the same thing happens. You know, the public institutions become ineffective, problems don't get addressed, the citizens get angry, they get frustrated, and they start to develop more extreme and authoritarian views, and they become basically vulnerable to appeals from some authoritarian personality who appeals to them because they says, I'm powerful and I'm going to kick butt and I'm going to take care of your problems. But then what happens, you get the authoritarian person in and they're more about consolidating their own power, and that's typically at the expense of the governmental institutions. You can see some examples around the world if you follow world affairs. Turkey, Venezuela, Poland, Hungary, all have been showing more and more problems with that, where the democratic institutions are eroding as those authoritarian leaders grow their power and work against the democratic institutions. And those same trends are showing up more and more all the time in America. So we may be a little bit cocky thinking we're immune to that, but we're not, and we're showing many of the same danger signals that others have passed, and so we really need to get a hold of this soon. And of course, the worst is the violence, and this is just a couple of examples, one from each side. There's one on the left, one on the right, that both engaged in violence and killing or attempted murder just because of political differences. Now, one of the shames of all of this is that if you could get people to sit down and just talk not about policy positions or parties, but about their values, you might actually find that most of us share similar values. All of us want to live in a peaceful, safe situation for ourselves and our families. We want to have a chance to educate our children, have good health care, good jobs, things like that. So we actually are not as far apart as we might realize, but when we concentrate on party politics and policies, it sounds like we're at war, and in some ways we are, just without guns in those cases. Somebody's really needs to mute. There's a lot of bad noise going on. Could one of y'all try to mute whoever, everybody else? Thank you.
I think that may be Thurlow.
Okay, maybe if you could mute, please. Thank you. Okay, so the one of the things I did when I got into this with Braver Angels was also started as a psychologist, looking at the social sciences literature to find out what it tells us about political polarization, belief change, and that sort of thing. And it's incredibly complicated. It was amazing to me, all the different things that go on. And this is just a partial list. I'm not going to go into all of them, but rest assured, there's a lot more going on underneath the surface than you realize with your own beliefs. And this is true for all of us. Many of our decisions about our beliefs and our positions are made on the basis of emotional and unconscious factors. There are biological and neurological factors at work. We've heard of tribalism, where you have this strong group identity, and lots of things. So I'm just going to kind of cover a few of those. This is really a surface treatment, believe me. Biological and neurological factors. One thing is that when people get highly polarized, they start to become very emotional when they hear something that goes against their beliefs. And one thing we know in neuroscience is that when your emotions are high, most of your brain is using a little more primitive part of your brain to dictate what happens. It's the fight-flight response you may have heard about or be familiar with. And we all know this. We've all had those experiences when we were angry at some point, and then we did or said something really stupid. And later when we calm down, we say, oh my God, why did I say that? That's just an example of when emotions get involved, we don't think things through very carefully, and bad decisions often come about as a result. Another factor is that our brain over a millennia has evolved in certain ways to have biases. That's a normal part of human behavior. It was originally an evolutionarily adaptive kind of thing because it helped us kind of take shortcuts in making decisions. When we had so much information, it was just overwhelming. But unfortunately, it has a downside where we can actually wind up not being in touch with what's actually going on. In some ways, some psychologists talk about the brain has evolved to have the kind of an immune system, just like our body fights off foreign bacteria and viruses when they recognize them as not part of their own body. It's as if our brain does the same thing to fight off ideas that are not part of our own ideas or that of our group. So that gets into the group identity and tribalism issue. We are social animals, just like many other social animals. Bees, monkeys, etc., ants. We're social, so we tend to hang together in groups. And one of the things that's developed because of that is a tendency to want to adopt and maintain the beliefs of our group, and conversely to distrust those of other groups. So this tendency to identify with our tribe now has gotten to where a lot of that is based on our political beliefs rather than what used to be more like, well, what country are you from, or what football team do you like, or something like that. And unfortunately, all of these things that I'm talking about, many in politics and media and advertising and so on, they've learned about these tendencies, and they've learned how to use that to manipulate us to buy what they want us to buy or believe what they want us to believe, and that sort of thing. So it's important for us to learn this and pay attention to our own biases and realize when we might be being manipulated. Now, one big source of this is media. There are huge media influences. And when I say that, I don't mean to just say all media is bad. I don't believe that at all. There's some excellent journalists and media sources out there, but these days there's so much media from so many directions. The journalistic standards have been lowered. Everybody's more interested in making money or getting likes and that sort of thing. So what happens then is you do the things that bring people to you. What brings people to you? Something emotional, something remarkable. You know, we drive down the interstate and don't even look twice when things are going okay. But if we see a wreck on the side, okay, everybody stops and rubbernecks, right? We pay attention to those things that evoke emotional reactions. In the same way, you've probably heard the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what happens on news. Something that is, really remarkable and emotional, everybody pays attention. And then we also probably know about the impact of social media and the algorithms that hook us up with like-minded people based on our pattern of likes and all. What that does is it puts us in a bubble or an echo chamber. We hear the same things over and over. We don't hear any new and different information or perspectives. And so we think the world ought to be the way we and everybody else we know looks like, when there are other people with very different bits of information out there and different views. Mark Twain said it this way: it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So that gets at the problem we have these days with disinformation, fake news, propaganda, the information bubbles, all of that. It's a real problem, and we have to become more good in our media hygiene habits, I would say. And then, of course, this goes back to the Nazi propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, who said, make the lie big, keep it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they'll believe it. And we can see examples of that all the time now. So that sounds pretty depressing. What do you do about it? There are some potential solutions I wanted to cover briefly. One is because we tend to be tribal in nature and we identify a certain tribe, one thing that helps is try to identify with a larger tribe. So rather than say, well, I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative, you may be, but try to adopt the view of something bigger than that, like I'm an American, or I'm a human, a member of the human race, or something like that. Because the bigger the group, the more common elements and the more diversity that we can be comfortable with. Another potential solution is to try your best, and this is hard to do because it goes against what our brain wants to do, but base your decisions on facts and information that has been vetted and is reliable, and also filter that through your values and try to always be thinking about what I'm doing and what I'm saying, is that consistent with my base bottom line moral values? So do that rather than, say something and advocate for something simply because your group says that's the way you ought to do it. Always let your values and the facts dictate your decision rather than a group's viewpoint. So that ability to use your rational and values approaches, it's hard, but so you have to keep working at it and doing it over and over, because you'll always slip into it. We all do, and I do too. Here's a simpler solution: listen more and talk less. There's a saying, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Follow that ratio. So listening is really important because usually we're wanting to speak and persuade. Instead, start with this attitude of listening so that you can understand where the other person's coming from. It doesn't mean you agree with it. You may never agree with them, but try to really genuinely be curious about where they're coming from and why they believe that. What in their experience led them to that? If you jump in right away trying to persuade people or give them different information that they're not comfortable with, the first thing that we all do is we get defensive, we dig in, and it's harder to impact them. So start by just simply listening and being curious, and that tends to lower the defensiveness, and then hopefully maybe sometimes they might be more open to hearing something from you. We also know from social sciences research the extremely powerful impact of positive relationships. Positive relationships heal a lot of pain and a lot of problems. So if you want to persuade someone, first listen to understand and try to build a relationship and not try to win the argument. Just communicate rather than try to persuade. as that relationship develops, then you become more able to do something like have an impact. And an example here would be Daryl Davis, that you may have heard about. This is a African-American gentleman who's a musician who, I'll short version because I know I'm running out of time, but he was able, over a period of several years, he started talking to people, and he found he was able to convince over 200 Ku Klux Klan members to get out of the organization, simply because he spent time with them and talked to them in a cordial way and developed relationships. And that seems impossible, but it just shows the power of positive relationships. And then the final thing I'll make a point of is that when we have very different viewpoints, liberals and conservatives and so on, oftentimes we both are arguing from something that's a good idea, but they're competing. So, for example, security versus freedom. Now, I would imagine all of us would agree that security is really important. That's valuable. So is freedom. Well, it turns out, though, they have kind of an inverse relationship. If you get lots of security, your freedom goes down. If you get lots of freedom, you're less secure. So so if one person's arguing security and the other freedom, what they need to realize is they're both arguing something positive, but they have to argue instead for where is the dividing line that gets the best of both worlds. And that's a way that you can find some common ground there. I'd recommend David Brooks to you for reading more about that. So that's a little bit, it's real quick, but I'm going to turn it back over to April now to talk about Braver Angels.
I think sometimes when we deal with issues that are this big, like polarization, that it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. Like, what can I do? I mean, I think about right now with what's going on with the protest, and if folks didn't stand up and start actually looking for ways to make a difference, they could have felt, any of us could feel overwhelmed with how do we actually make a change in the system. In this case, Braver Angels has actually provided some structure for people to start getting involved in making a difference. And I know that all of you all, based on what your jobs are, you come into contact with people who are having all kinds of different backgrounds and from different political persuasions. Glenn and I even are on different sides of the political aisle, which is one of the reasons why we like to connect together. And yet we connect in ways that we focus on the relationship more than we do on any differences that we might have. And Braver Angels allows you to be able to do that. The approach that you can see there on the screen is that we work towards not trying to persuade the other persons or persons from the other side, but to really, truly try to understand where they are coming from. And that means that we have to take time to build those relationships, engage with the other, not just with the people that are just like us. It's so easy to be connected in those echo chambers with the people that are listening to us, only the people that are listening and that are like us, and not the people that are different. And so this organization actually supports things like listening and recognizing our biases in order to be able to realize that we are, as we are communicating with other people, we're part of the problem and we're part of the solution. We're not trying to get people to change their points of view by being aware of your biases, but trying to realize that we can be passionate, but we do need to actually think about how it is that we can be listen and be heard. At every level of leadership, we work to have equal numbers of liberal and conservatives in an organization. In the states, as we have alliances that are in our particular areas, we try to do that. With the recognition that we really are trying, again, to develop vehicles for how we can train people and how to reduce polarization. So they have several workshops, and we're actually going to be hosting a couple of those this fall as our Central Arkansas Alliance. We intend at this point, we think we're going to be hosting them online. At least that's what our preparation is. The whole Braver Angels organization is moving all of these workshops to be online. The skills-based workshop is developing skills in how to talk and listen to each other. The red-blue workshop, really it gets an equal number of reds, Republicans and blues, Democrats together, and actually leads them through a whole day discussion in their like groups and then in their different groups to actually realize stereotypes of the other and be able to see what common ground you might have. The Depolarizing Within workshop is one in which you recognize your own biases that might be making it difficult to communicate with another. And then recently they've been doing monthly debates on controversial topics. And if any of you were ever in high school or college debates, they're like 2.5 hours long, and there are rules. It's very much like parliamentary procedure kind of debates, which has been interesting for me as a communication specialist to watch. So there are many ways of getting involved. I did put the link there that you could, in the chat box, that if you wanted to go to it and give us your personal information, you could. But you can also go and visit their website. There is a nominal fee if you want to get access to a lot more of their resources. You can give more than $12 a year if you want, but $12 a year is all they require to become a member. And attending events, workshops, right now there's opportunities to attend events because we're doing things virtually over Zoom with people from all over the nation, which is one of the things that we haven't gotten to do in the past when we've done these kinds of events, which is kind of cool. Glenn and I are actually volunteering as organizers, as moderators. We're getting training to, and actually have been trained to conduct these workshops and debates. And then, of course, every single person that you come across, being able to listen and understand where they're coming from and acting individually in your interactions is one way of getting involved. So I think we have some time, a little bit of time here for questions. No one wrote any questions in the chat box, but if you want to unmute yourself or write your question in the chat box, we probably have about 5 minutes for questions here. So I'll be quiet and see if people want to ask.
This is Anne. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excuse me. As community business owners, what you know, I so feel for the folks that are having peaceful demonstrations, and then we have the the rebel rousers that are coming in. As business leaders, what can we do what kind of language should we use that's not polarizing? In other words, it's real easy to have a strong feeling on one side of that debate or the other, but we want our community to know we embrace, but yet sometimes I don't say anything because I'm afraid to say anything. So how do I make statements that are not polarizing? I guess that's my question.
I don't know that you all want to do this as an organization or not, but many professional organizations are actually coming out with statements about their support for certain things. You have to be very careful and kind of vet those, and because language does matter. Glenn, do you want to add anything there in terms of what they could do as a group?
Well, in terms of, the kind of language and what you say, I would say, when in doubt, default to what we've already talked about. Look at what Braver Angels emphasizes, which is listening rather than talking. When in doubt, listen to what other people are saying. Try to ask them additional questions to make sure you understand where they're coming from, what they believe. Another thought I might have is that, remember I mentioned that many times we all share common values, even though we may differ on politics and policies. So to the extent you can have your communications centered around values that are likely to be widely held, that could be helpful as well. Anything beyond that, then there are a lot of skills that are available that, of course, we're talking about through Braver Angels. So I'd say get involved, go on the website, take a look at the information there, And if you're inspired to do so, join, because once you join, you can get access to the members section of the website that has training for you in some of those very skills that we're talking about. So that's a couple of ideas I would have.
It's so difficult, and as you all know, because if you come down on, let's just say, for example, if we looked at it in terms of sides with what the racial things going on, you could come down on the side of things need to change in terms of Black Lives Matter. You could come down on the side of we support police. It's not an either or though. And that's what sometimes is so difficult, is because we tend to think, okay, well, if I come down on this side, then I'm going to alienate this other side. And really we, you know, when we think about what's happening, it's a human rights issue, regardless of, you know, everyone wants to be treated as a human that's deserving of respect. And so, you know, working together as an organization to figure out ways of supporting that, that's difficult. But you all have some wonderful members, I'm sure, that have some great ideas.
Thank you so much.
Are there other questions?
Well, if there are no other questions, I would point out that as it indicates here, our first ever online Alliance meeting is going to be Monday, July 6th, 6 p.m. to about 7:15, 7:30. You'll need a Zoom invitation, so if you're interested, contact us. I believe, let me see, I believe we've got, there we go. There's a couple of email addresses, one for me, one for April. And you can get in touch with us about getting an invitation to that. Also, if you're interested and you're on Facebook, search Facebook for Braver Angels of Central Arkansas. That's our Facebook group, and we put things there from time to time. So you should have some information there and another way to contact us. All you got to do to get into that group is just answer 4 quick questions. You know. So
I also put our emails in the chat box, and again would remind people about that form. If they want to fill that out as well, they can just cut and paste that into a document or into their web browser.
So I'm going to
well, we thank you guys so much. This is great information. Of course, it's timely, and I think we're still in all shock of how, you know, from the pandemic and then hitting with this, it's you know, it's put our community in an awkward position, because in our respecting each other is so important. But, you know, in our environment here at the bank, you can't tolerate any type of division like this. And so it's very hard, and it's just hard to see our country going through this. And it's what can we do to protect our West Village members, you know, so that we don't alienate anyone or cause any problems. So this has been very informative. I'm looking forward to re-listening to this. Guys, we did a video or record this, Marilyn did. So I think this will be good information. We kind of can digest it and work towards a better go on how we can bring solutions to our area.